Welcome and thank you for your interest. I'd like to talk about tipping points as indicators of atmospheric efficacy. This presentation was first given at the Citisenz Conference in Lisbon in July 2025. Why is it so difficult to shape atmospheres intentionally? Why does bleakness take hold where liveliness was planned? Can we explain what atmospheres consist of? Do we understand their inner workings? What vocabulary do we have to discuss them? As a designer, artist, and author, I have spent 4 decades exploring atmospheres. My approach is rooted in experience and spans disciplines. Current debates on atmospheres reveal a wide spectrum of contrasting perspectives: philosophical versus pragmatic, Western versus Eastern, aesthetic versus social. This variety of academic approaches reflects the complexity of the phenomenon, but it also risks fragmenting atmospheres into countless isolated facets. Can we identify general forces that constitute the universal phenomenon of atmospheres? To explore this question, I aim to build bridges between different cultural and disciplinary viewpoints. The result is the atmospheric efficacy model, which does not claim to be a fully developed academic theory. Rather, it positions itself as a tool for mutual understanding, reflection, and practical application. This contribution engages with the topic on linguistic, conceptual, and experiential levels. In German, many abstract nouns ending in heit or keit, such as Gemütlichkeit, Geborgenheit, Einsamkeit, and so on, denote states, relations, or qualities. They describe something atmospheric, something that can be perceived and bodily sensed, yet not objectified. These are concepts that lie beyond the merely subjective, and as such, they could contribute to a more objective engagement with the topic. However, in everyday German, such terms are often narrowed down to concrete circumstances or specific details, for example, security to relationships, buildings or cars, cheerfulness to personalities or events. This restricts their scope. In my experience, once I bring these terms into a conversation, atmospheres become more immediately intelligible and graspable. Equivalent expressions exist in English, French, and presumably many other languages as well. Establishing a shared atmospheric vocabulary could help anchor the topic more firmly in everyday life. In his book, Atmospheres, Aesthetics of Emotional Spaces, Tonino Grifero writes, "Atmospheres are spatialized feelings. That is to say, they are the specific emotional quality of a given lived space. The spatiality of atmospheres is widely acknowledged across disciplines and cultures. Following Hermann Schmidt's, spatiality manifests as either constriction or expansiveness. It is bodily sensed. However, interpretations of spatiality within atmospheres vary greatly. Gernot Böhme speaks of the way in which things and surroundings present themselves. Martina Löw, by contrast, frames spatiality as a social phenomenon. Bille and Schwabe offer yet another perspective. They see it as a synthesis of the diverse. How living cities feel as they are atmospherically constituted by relation between affective spaces, attuned bodies, time, weather, and other material phenomena. Despite these varied interpretations, spatiality always works in the same way within atmospheres, as something that is bodily sensed. This holds true regardless of its nature. A windowless, low-ceilinged room can evoke a sense of constriction. The same feeling can arise when someone is consistently ignored within a group. A wide open landscape can evoke a sense of freedom, just as mastering a language or a skill can. The scale of atmospherically sensed spatiality spans from constriction to expansiveness. We are exquisitely attuned to it. I'd like to draw attention to a connection that is often overlooked. Coming into the world is an experience we all share. It is existential. It is profoundly spatial and therefore also atmospheric. Our very first contact with the world is a transition from constriction to expansiveness, from the womb into the open void. Michel Serres gives a vivid metaphorical account of this foundational experience in Les Cinq Sens, the Five Senses, particularly in the opening pages. Is it any wonder then that we are so attuned to spatiality, that spatiality is so crucial to the efficacy of atmospheres? Situations and surroundings are consistently seen as relevant in the context of atmospheres. Both are spatial because we are always in them. However, their philosophical interpretation differs greatly from everyday language. From a practical standpoint, I consider as surroundings that which concretely, materially, and objectively surrounds us, and as situations that which envelops us abstractly, ideationally, psychologically, or socially. Situations and surroundings interact in their spatiality. Hermann Schmitz focused on the concept of bodily sensing. It is often conflated with perception. But the two must be distinguished. The color red can be perceived, but not bodily sensed. A car can be perceived, but not bodily sensed. We can only bodily sense either when we are immersed in them, when dressed head to toe in red, or seated inside the car. Only that which envelops us spatially becomes atmospherically tangible and effective. Christian Julmi describes atmospheres in shared situation as being similarly perceived within and through shared situations. This idea is broadly accepted in new phenomenology. I call this shared sensing of atmospheres omnisubjective, as we experience ourselves as being immersed in something together with all others present. When multiple people share an atmosphere, a funeral, concert, exam, or sports event, its conditions, states, and qualities can be experienced as collective and shared. Omnisubjectivity is not the exception, but the rule, as we are rarely entirely alone in our everyday surroundings and situation. This challenges the common assumption that atmospheres are subjective. More often, the opposite is true. To summarize, spatiality is key to the efficacy of atmospheres. Surroundings and situations interact in their spatiality. Only what spatially envelops us becomes atmospherically effective. Atmospheres connect us omnisubjectively. I'd now like to move on to the second part of my talk. As a child, I was fascinated by atmospheres. I remember standing in my parents' shop, watching as passers-by took refuge in the entrance when it started to rain. Each time a sudden sense of togetherness emerged, as if by magic. This small moment illustrates the 4 preceding points. Spatiality, being caught in the rain and stepping into the entrance, is decisive. The surprise of the rain, situation, and the physical presence of the entrance, surroundings, interact. The entrance becomes a place of shelter. This shared surrounding and shared situation give rise to an atmosphere of togetherness. Since spatiality is crucial to how atmospheres take effect, they cannot be fully understood from within any single discipline. Yet the question remains, what exactly constitutes atmospheres? To get closer to an answer, it is helpful to focus on atmospheric tipping points, because anything capable of transforming an atmosphere must also be a force within it. Through reflection, testing, and experiential analysis, I have identified 5 such atmospheric forces. They are always co-present in any atmosphere. Each of the 5 can become so dominant that it transforms the atmosphere entirely. The countless particulars that shape atmospheres can be grouped under these forces. The forces are place, relational beings, occurrences, sensory qualities, and culture. Each will now be introduced in turn. Place. If we are at a party with someone and leave the kitchen for another room, the conversation immediately changes. It intensifies, fades, or comes to a halt. A place need not be material or concrete. Where we are, geographically, physically, emotionally, or socially, is always sensed spatially. This is reflected in expressions like "I've been backed into a corner" or "I hit rock bottom." Whether we have room to move in a certain matter or setting or not is bodily sensed as either constriction or expansiveness. Where we are is always atmospherically relevant. I conclude that place is an atmospheric force. Relational beings. When another person, or even a dog, enters a room, the atmosphere changes instantly. Not only living beings can be relational beings, but also anything that can become a counterpart or companion. This includes governments, political parties, corporations, agencies, but also inanimate systems or devices such as a smartphone or technologies like AI. Regardless of their nature, relational beings have an immediate effect on an atmosphere. if my hands are tied by a supervisor, if my GPS sends me the wrong way, or if I'm surrounded by machines in a hospital, this leaves a bodily sensed impression of spatial constriction. On the other hand, if I'm embedded in a broad network of colleagues, if I can make productive use of AI, or if I'm skilled in dealing with technology, I bodily sense expansiveness in the form of being supported, confident, or capable. Who or what is present is always atmospherically relevant. I conclude that relational beings are an atmospheric force. Occurrences: a sudden change in the weather, an accident, a trip, a celebration, an illness, or a geopolitical incident. All of these can instantly transform an atmosphere. Occurrences are the most overlooked and underestimated force in atmospheres. This is hardly surprising, since no academic discipline is dedicated solely to them. Occurrences can be atmospherically accompanied by spatial feelings of constriction or expansiveness, as we all bodily experienced during the COVID-19 pandemic. What occurs is always atmospherically relevant. I conclude that occurrences are an atmospheric force. Sensory qualities. Unbearable noise or stench can instantly destroy the peaceful atmosphere of a balmy summer evening. Colors, smells, sounds, light, material, form, and more belong to the atmospheric force of sensory qualities. Sensory qualities are perceivable, but once they surround us spatially, they are bodily sensed. They can evoke coziness and cheerfulness, but also feelings of constriction like cold, or expansiveness, fresh air. When they envelop us, sensory qualities constitute an atmospheric force. Culture. In an unfamiliar situation or surrounding, in a foreign country or a new social setting or workplace, there are rules, codes, and concepts that we may not know or have mastered. Conforming to or violating such rules, codes, and concepts can cause an atmosphere to transform in an instant. This is bodily sensed. It produces spatial feelings of being enveloped by safety, intimacy, certainty, or conversely by insecurity, disorientation, and forlornness. Every culture, be it food culture, corporate culture, or clan culture, has this effect. I conclude that culture is an atmospheric force. Before I close, I would like to touch briefly on the nature and interplay of the five forces. Place and sensory qualities tend to manifest as surroundings, while relational beings and culture are more likely to appear as situations. Occurrences unfold both as surroundings and as situations. A balanced relationship between situation and surrounding gives rise to a bodily sensed coherence. The same holds true for the interplay of the five forces. The practical application of atmospheres requires spatial and compositional sensitivity, interdisciplinary thinking, and experience. What matters is not so much the individual atmospheric elements themselves, but how and whether they can come into play through the interaction of the five forces. The material and immaterial, the aesthetic and the social, the subjective and the objective, the abstract and the concrete are always closely interwoven. Enabling an atmosphere is like cooking and just as rewarding when it succeeds. Although I do not present a formal academic theory, the atmospheric efficacy model is suited to practical application. Since culture is not treated as an external condition but as an intrinsic force within atmospheres, the model is open to intercultural discourse. With the help of this model, we may consciously shape the atmospheres of everyday life, whether in cities, schools, public institutions, hospitals, or corporations, for a tangibly more livable future. Thank you very much for your attention.